Good morning, Gail. So welcome back everybody to our fourth video in an 8-part series on the charity investment governance principles. These were a set of principles that have been put together by charities, and they were led by a steering group that consisted of the Charity Finance Group, NCVO, WCVA, ACF, and the Charities Responsible Investment Network. And the project was funded by a group of philanthropic funders. The principles focus on the practice for England and Wales and the regulatory requirements there. And I'm joined today by Gail Cunningham, who led on the development of these principles. So in today's video, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into principle number 3, which focuses on integrity. A big, bold word here, Gail.
Yes, indeed. So as we mentioned in some of the earlier videos, the principles follow the structure of the Charity Governance Code, and that's so that the two can be used in tandem. So a charity that's working on its governance might want to look through the Charity Governance Code, and then when it's looking at its investments, obviously the principles provide more detail on those. When we're looking at integrity, and we've talked a little bit already about the charity's purposes being placed at the forefront of decision making, and that all investments are held in order to further the purposes, and trustees really need to think about what that means in their charity's context. Obviously, some charities will talk about mission or values and all of those kind of things, and that's all encompassed in charity purposes, and we've used that language because that's what's used by the Charity Commission. In terms of the outcomes and what they'll be looking to explore in this principle, it's both thinking about investments in terms of a financial return, which is obviously the majority of what we'll all be thinking about with investments, but also deeper work about the purposes. So what's the internal work that trustees, staff and committee members might need to do to really understand the charity's purposes and how those relate to the investments? And then also, how is that kind of externally communicated by the charity as well?
And why is it that this is such an important principle then?
I think what was really key in this, and what came out of what a lot of the steering group members, what their charity members were telling them, was the new CC14 is obviously very user-friendly from the Charity Commission, but it doesn't actually set out how you enact some of these things. Also, there'd been the Butler's Loss legal judgment that obviously explored conflicts between a charity's purposes and its investments, and it also explored reputational risks. And so what we're looking to do in this principle is set out that charities are exploring the full range of options to further their purposes. Obviously, as I said, some of that will be about, a big part of that will be about financial returns, but it might also be about looking at responsible impact, social investment, and so on. Also, that charities are really looking at what came out of the Butler's Loss legal case around conflicts between the charity's purposes and the investment, how those can be explored, and what action might need to be taken if it's determined that action needs to be taken. And the same thing for reputational risks, how those can be explored and recorded, and what appropriate action might need to be taken.
Yeah, and we already spoke about in an earlier video about this shared understanding and the focus on charity's purpose. But in practice, I guess we always expect board members to be acting with integrity, just in all aspects of their charitable work. But so maybe could you draw out some information about pieces of conflict or conflicts of interest or private benefit, and how those have manifested in charity trustees' integrity?
Absolutely. And so that's included in this principle as well. There's a whole section on conflicts of interest. There's lots and lots of examples in there, you'll be pleased to know. So you can click down and see, well, what are conflicts of interest? And that might be about a shareholding where one trustee perhaps holds a really large shareholding, perhaps because they're the founder of the charity and so on, and where there might be conflicts of interest there, where maybe a trustee or another person with influence over the investments was employed by the investment advisor and so on, where trustees have professional expertise and they're using that for the charity, how you can avoid conflicts of interest there, or really basic things like hospitality that you might receive in relation to the charity's investments and what that might look like. And it really talks about, with conflicts of interest, the importance of identifying, managing and recording. And of course, a big part of effective trusteeship is making sure that discussions are held, things are really explored, and then it's recorded that that has happened and that trustees have done that. On the private benefit side, obviously the Charity Commission guidance does provide quite clear guidance that private benefit needs to be no more than incidental, necessary in the circumstances, reasonable in amount, and in the best interest of the charity. Now, for the vast majority of charities, there aren't necessarily going to be issues between private benefit and the investment portfolio. You might want to look at the previous one around conflicts of interest. If there is a company that's connected to a trustee and that trustee stands to benefit and so on, what might that look like? The other thing that's quite interesting around private benefit that comes up is perhaps where charities are making social investments. And obviously, if you're making very early stage risky investments, are there opportunities for private benefit in that context? And we've given some references to this, but we would really encourage charities to explore different ways of exploring that. For example, the Association of Charitable Foundations runs the SIG, the Social Impact Investors Group. So if social investment is something you're looking at, there are resources out there around private benefit, because that's where we see charities really trying to work out how that applies in their context.
Yeah, and so when everybody has considered how it's applicable to them, I'm sure we've got plenty examples that we can draw on, and there are certainly some already in the principles online at CIGP.org.uk, and you can help draw out for our listeners now maybe just some implementation requirements around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take this one back, I think, to the section on the conflicts with the purposes and the reputational risks, because that is something that charities, particularly larger charities, are really wanting to explore, and looking at how the board and the staff can work together to explore those. Obviously, there are actions you might want to take if you decide there is a conflict with the purposes, or you decide there is a reputational risk, and that might include limiting the investment. It might include being a really engaged shareholder, encouraging the company that's causing issues to improve their practice and so on. And that principle also explores the balancing exercise you can undertake. So charities that do identify conflict with purposes and reputational risks, what is the likelihood and the seriousness of that conflict or that reputational risk? And what might it mean financially, and how does the charity balance those things? Obviously, for very large charities with large investment portfolios, or charities with large endowments, there's going to be a lot more likelihood and a lot more potential seriousness of those conflicts than if you're a much smaller charity that's perhaps just keeping cash in a bank account. So it's making sure that that balancing exercise is conducted in a way that is very cognizant of the size and complexity of the charity's investments.
Yeah, and it's all proportionality, isn't it? Ultimately, we're all acting with integrity, and as long as we can, show that as trustees and charities, it's useful to consider it in a proportional way. So I guess this principle, it is a really critical principle. So I'm actually just going to take a moment to remind everybody, you can actually download a PDF version of these principles if you just go to the CIGP.org.uk. You can either PDF the must and recommend, or must recommend and consider principles that are listed for each of the individual principles. And we would encourage anybody who's involved in charity investments just to have a direct look at the website so you get the full information, and especially those case studies there. So in the next episode, we're going to cover decision making, risk and control. And we're going to look at some more practical, this is a bit more of a practical principle, focusing on the benefits of using investment advisors and delegating some key responsibilities. So if you want to hear about this, then please make sure that you go to broadstone.co.uk and you can subscribe to this channel so that you can get a notification when the next video is available. Looking forward to seeing you there.